Have you ever sat somewhere and realized that nobody saw you? As if the world had become deaf, blind, and too hurried to notice your existence? I felt that way, on that cold dawn in Dallas, when I saw that man sitting in the corner of the emergency room. The clock was almost midnight, and he had been there for hours. Nobody seemed to care. Doctors rushed past, nurses checked clipboards, patients groaned in the hallways. But that man, quiet, with his worn hat and distant gaze, seemed invisible. Something about him caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he held his cap between his fingers, as if it were a treasure. Or maybe it was the silence, that kind of silence that speaks louder than 1,000 words. I just knew something was wrong. He didn't ask for help, he didn't make a scene. He just waited. And the more I watched him, the tighter my heart became. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. That night seemed like so many others in the hospital, but deep down, something told me it wasn't. That this man was keeping a secret, and that, somehow, fate had placed me there for a reason. When I started my shift, around 10 o'clock at night, the hospital was already in chaos. The emergency room was packed, people were screaming for help, monitors were beeping non-stop. That man was already there, sitting in the same chair, with the same expression. Nobody knew his name. Nobody had asked. I, Maria Lopez, have worked in cleaning for almost 20 years. I've seen it all in that hospital. People arriving lifeless, others reborn out of nowhere, miracles and tragedies mixing together as if they were routine. But there was something in his eyes that made me stop. It was different. It was too calm for someone who seemed to be suffering. The clock kept ticking. 1 hour, 2, 3, and no one approached him. I saw him rummaging in his pockets, trying to pull something out, maybe a document, but he gave up. It was as if he had accepted that no one cared. That his pain had no place in that cold, impersonal room. Sometimes I would walk by, pretending to clean the chairs, just to get a closer look. I noticed he was trembling slightly. Maybe from the cold. Maybe from fear. Or loneliness. And that's when I realized something. His shoes were worn, but clean. His hands, wrinkled, bore the marks of hard work. He wasn't an ordinary street man. As the minutes dragged on, I watched him. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't complaining. He just stared fixedly at the floor, as if he were praying silently. And every now and then he murmured something softly, almost like a prayer. With each passing hour, the room grew emptier. The lights flickered, the clock's ticking echoed down the hallway. And he remained there, motionless, like a forgotten statue. I began to wonder who he was. What he was doing there alone, with no one to accompany him. At one point, a doctor came by and asked if he had a medical record. When the elderly man tried to speak, he coughed violently and lowered his head. The doctor just sighed and left. That revolted me. I felt something inside me boiling. How could they treat someone like that? I tried to hide my emotion, but the tears came. Life had taught me to swallow my tears, especially working where pain is routine, but that night, something inside me broke. It was as if I felt his pain, even without knowing him. I continued my work, but I couldn't get that man out of my head. Every now and then I'd look at him, hoping he'd react, that he'd say something. But no. Just that silence. A heavy silence, like that of someone carrying too many stories to tell. The clock struck 4 in the morning when I saw him lean slightly to the side. I thought he was going to sleep, but something worried me. I walked slowly over to him, with the floorcloth in my hand, pretending to clean the hallway. I wanted to see if he was all right. As I approached, I saw his lips moving. He was saying something I didn't understand. It sounded like a word in Italian or Latin. I don't know. His eyes were half open, and a strange gleam reflected in them. That's when I noticed a thin scar near his temple. An old mark, from someone who has survived more than one war. The air in the hospital felt different. Almost sacred. As if something was about to happen. And I didn't know why, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I went to the water fountain to get some water and, when I came back, I saw a nurse giggling softly, pointing at him. They said he was a lost old man, who must be confused. I felt angry. God knows how painful it is to be judged by someone who doesn't even look you in the eye. I thought about approaching again, but I hesitated. The rule was clear: cleaning staff don't get involved with patients. But that night, the rule seemed insignificant compared to what I felt. Outside, the wind was blowing strongly. The windows were rattling. And that man remained there, motionless, with the same serene expression. He seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. That's when I noticed a small crumpled piece of paper on the floor next to him. I discreetly picked it up. It had shaky, almost illegible writing, "Don't let me die forgotten." My heart raced. I held the paper for a moment, not knowing what to do. It was a cry for help, but also a cathartic release. Who would write something like that if they weren't in despair? I looked at him again, trying to understand. And then I saw, a tear was slowly rolling down his wrinkled face. That broke my heart. I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I went to the nurse's desk, tried to explain the situation, but they told me to go back to my ward. They said the man was being observed. A lie. He was being forgotten. I went back into the room and knelt beside him. I gently touched his arm and whispered, "Everything will be all right, sir. I promise." He slowly opened his eyes and murmured something I'll never forget. "No one has promised me that in many years." Those words kept echoing in my head. The promise I made without knowing what was to come. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change my life, and the history of that hospital, forever. Because what I was about to discover wasn't just about a forgotten man. It was about an entire past hidden beneath a tattoo. And in that silent dawn, destiny had already begun to write the rest of the story. The following morning, the waiting room was more crowded than ever. Flashing lights, voices crisscrossing the air, the smells of coffee and disinfectant mingled. And he was still there. The same man, in the same position, the same fixed gaze into nothingness. He seemed like a ghost lost amidst the rush of the living. The night shift had ended, but I decided to stay a little longer. Something inside me wouldn't let me leave. It was as if I had a mission, a calling that didn't come from people, but from God. An impulse that said, "Don't abandon him." While the doctors rushed around with medical records and the nurses typed without looking at anyone, I clearly saw the contrast. It was as if the entire hospital had become a machine, and he, an invisible error in the system. A man without a name, without priority, without hurry. With each passing minute, I felt their guilt growing inside me. They didn't know what I knew. That time is cruel to those who are forgotten. And there, amidst the noise of the monitors and the distant sound of sirens, that old man's heart might have been saying goodbye. I tried to speak to the receptionist, a new woman named Kelly. She glanced quickly at the form and said, "No registration, no emergency." Wait. The word "hopit" came out of her mouth like a sentence. Nobody realized he had already been waiting for more than 8 hours. The clock struck 9:30 in the morning when I saw something that chilled me to the bone. A doctor walked by, glanced at him, and looked away, without even checking if he was breathing. That's how indifference works, not with hatred, but with absence. And absence can kill more than disease. I went back to cleaning, but my heavy heart prevented me from focusing. Every time the mop glided across the floor, I saw the reflection of that tired face in the wet floor, as if he were asking me not to let him disappear. It was then that a nurse commented, "That old man appeared suddenly, nobody knows where he came from. He must be a wanderer." Everyone laughed. And I, inside, prayed silently. I asked God to show me what to do. Because I knew that, if nothing changed, that man wouldn't see the sunset. I approached him again. I placed a thin blanket over his shoulders. He didn't react, but a small smile appeared for a second. A weak smile, almost imperceptible, but full of gratitude. Sometimes, the smallest gesture is what matters most. While I was secretly tending to him, I noticed his breathing becoming irregular. Each breath was a reminder that time was running out. I tried to alert the nurses again, but they said, "He's not in the priority queue." Priority queue. As if life had categories. as if someone's worth could be measured by the type of clothes they wear or the name they have on their wrist. I felt a deep sense of outrage, because I knew what it was like to be ignored. I, too, had been in the wrong queue in life. The hours passed, and I began to observe the people around me. Everyone seemed so preoccupied with their own problems that they didn't even see the suffering of others. Parents complaining about the wait, young people laughing at their cell phones, exhausted doctors, and that old man, motionless. Suddenly, I noticed something on his hand that caught my attention, a small gold ring, worn with age, but with a curious inscription. It looked like a letter, perhaps a symbol. I couldn't read it properly, but something told me that the ring told a story. I went back to cleaning the floor, trying not to draw attention, but I kept my eyes on him. Every little detail fascinated me, the way he breathed, the way he pressed his cap against his chest, his gaze lost somewhere far away, as if he were trapped between this world and another. At that moment, I realized how cruel the world can be to the elderly. They become invisible, as if time erases the importance they once had. And yet, there is a silent dignity in them that no one else sees. For a moment, I wondered who he might have been. A father, a soldier, a pastor, a man of faith. That face wasn't that of an ordinary person. It was the face of someone who had faced a lot, and survived. I stopped in front of him and asked quietly, "Do you have anyone you can call? Any family?" He just moved his lips, murmuring something that sounded like, "Nobody." That word pierced my chest like an arrow. Nobody. What a harsh, cold, lonely word. So short, and yet so devastating. I grabbed a glass of water and offered it to him. His hands trembled as he tried to hold it. I touched them gently. It was the first time I felt the icy temperature of his skin. It was a coldness that came not only from his body, but from his soul. I looked around. No one saw. No one wanted to see. Indifference is a heavy curtain, and behind it, the pain grows in silence. That's when the reception phone rang. Kelly answered and said, in an impatient tone, "Yes, we have an elderly person without identification. He hasn't been seen yet." Pause. "Yes, that's fine." And she hung up. No one asked anything else. That call left me uneasy. There was something strange in the air. Something told me that this man wasn't who he seemed to be. At that moment, he opened his eyes and looked at me in a way I will never forget. It was as if his gaze pierced me, as if he saw inside me. And he murmured a phrase that echoed like a prophetic whisper, "They will come, but they are not doctors." My whole body shivered. Before I could ask what he meant, he closed his eyes again. The phrase kept spinning in my mind. They will come, but they are not doctors. Who were they? And why did he seem so sure of it? At that moment, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On his left wrist, there was a faded mark, almost hidden beneath the wrinkled skin. An old, somewhat faded tattoo. It looked like a symbol. My heart raced. Curiosity took hold of me. I approached slowly, trying to get a better look. The symbol was small, circular, and had something inside, perhaps a letter. But before I could understand what it was, a nurse came by and told me to clean another area. I had to leave. I looked back one last time, and saw the old man look up at the ceiling, as if expecting an answer from heaven. As I walked away, I sensed that something very big was about to happen. Something that no one in that hospital could have imagined. Because, amidst that indifference, a silent truth was about to be revealed, and it would begin with that mysterious tattoo, hidden beneath the skin of a man the whole world had decided to forget. When I returned from the other ward, the sun was already beginning to stream through the high windows of the hospital. The light streamed through the corridors and illuminated particles of dust in the air. It seemed almost sacred. Everything was silent for a few moments. And he was still there, alone. I picked up the cleaning cart and walked slowly, like someone carrying a secret. Each step echoed on the gleaming floor, mingled with the distant sound of the heart monitors. It was as if the entire hospital was breathing along with me, heavy, slow, attentive. I looked at him again. This time, more calmly. His pale skin, tired face, dry lips. And yet, there was something in his expression that intrigued me. It wasn't fear. It was a strange serenity, as if he already knew the end of his own story. I approached slowly. He seemed to be asleep, but I noticed his eyes were half open. His gaze was fixed, distant, almost lost in another time. I tried to speak softly. "Would you like some water?" No answer. Just that look, and a slight movement of his head. I placed the glass in his hands. And it was then that I noticed it again, the tattoo on his arm, hidden by the worn sleeve of his coat. I couldn't see it clearly, but the dark line and the circular shape caught my attention. Something inside me whispered, "This is no ordinary tattoo." I went back to cleaning the floor, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I wiped, I looked at the same spot. I knew I was overstepping my bounds as an employee, but sometimes the heart speaks louder than any rule. People kept walking past him as if he were invisible. Doctors, visitors, nurses. Everyone circled around him, averting their gaze. And the more I saw that, the more I wanted to protect him. I can't explain it, but there was something divine in that moment. As if God were telling me, "Stay close. Observe. There is purpose even in suffering." And I obeyed. I grabbed a chair and sat a few feet from him, pretending to rest. But in reality, I was observing every detail: the gold ring, the tattoo, the trembling hands. It was like watching a mystery about to be revealed. Suddenly, he coughed violently. I ran to help him. I held his shoulder and realized how cold he was. A coldness that seemed to come from within. "Wait, sir, I'll get help." He gripped my arm with surprising strength and said, "No, stay." That word, "stay," it paralyzed me. There was something in his tone of voice. It was firm, deep, full of a silent authority. It wasn't a request. It was almost an order, delivered gently. I sat down again, my heart racing. He took a deep breath and, for a moment, offered a slight smile. A smile of someone who recognizes a friendly face amidst the chaos. "What's your name, sir?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. Then he murmured, "John." That was all. No last name. Just John. And in that instant, I realized how much weight that common name carried. John. A simple name, but said in a way that seemed to contain a lifetime of secrets. Silence returned to the room. Only the sound of hurried footsteps and the air conditioning could be heard. But inside, everything screamed. I knew that this man was no simple forgotten patient. I looked at the tattoo again. Now, more clearly. The jacket had slipped a little, revealing part of the design. It looked like a circular symbol, with letters around it. Something old, maybe European. It wasn't anything I recognized. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was as if that mark had a life of its own. I tried not to look too much, but I couldn't. It pulled at me, as if it were hiding a forgotten piece of history. That's when I noticed something else. He was carrying a small rosary in his pocket. The beads were worn, some broken, and hanging from it was a darkened metal crucifix. When I touched it, I felt a strange warmth, as if that object had held all the prayers he had ever said in his life. "Do you believe in God?" I asked, almost without thinking. He looked at me and replied, "I believed when no one else did." That sentence gave me goosebumps all over. I thought about how many times I, too, had doubted. How many times, alone at home, I had asked God to show me that there was still goodness in the world. And suddenly, there he was, a mysterious, forgotten man, and a connection I didn't understand, but felt deeply. At that moment, we weren't a cleaning lady and a patient. We were two weary souls sharing the same silence. I stood there for a while, just watching. He was breathing heavily, but with a calmness that disconcerted me. It was as if he knew he was about to leave, and wasn't afraid. Suddenly, I heard my name being called over the loudspeaker. They needed me on the second floor. I stood up slowly, reluctant to go. I touched his shoulder and said, "I'll be right back, okay?" He just nodded. As I walked away, I felt his gaze follow me. A heavy, deep gaze that seemed to say, "You'll understand all of this eventually." I spent the rest of the morning thinking about him. No other patient had distracted me like that. It was as if something was connecting me to him, something bigger than I could comprehend. When I returned to the waiting room, I noticed it was empty. For a second, my heart raced. I looked at his chair, and he was still there. Only now, the sleeve of his coat was rolled up. And it was at that moment that I saw the tattoo in its entirety. The design was clear. A black circle with a symbol in the center, a rose entwined by a serpent. Around it, ancient, almost faded letters. I didn't know what they meant, but the power of that symbol was terrifying. I froze. I felt a chill run through my entire body. That wasn't just a tattoo. It was an emblem. Something important. Something dangerous. I looked around. No one else had noticed. And, for a moment, I wondered if I should tell someone. But a voice inside me told me not to do it yet. "Mr. John," I whispered, but he had already closed his eyes again. He seemed at peace. Or perhaps too exhausted to stay awake. As I gazed at that symbol, I felt a strange presence. Something told me that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The hospital, until then so cold and predictable, was about to become the stage for something much bigger. I didn't know it, but I had just opened the door to a secret that had lain hidden for decades. A secret that began, precisely, with that tattoo. That image wouldn't leave my head. The tattoo seemed to pulsate in my memory, as if each line, each curve, had something to say. I tried to keep cleaning, but the thought overwhelmed me. I knew something was wrong, something too big to be a coincidence. I returned to the waiting room after lunch. The hospital was quiet. The corridor echoed only with distant footsteps. He was still there, motionless, as if time had forgotten him. I sat for a moment a few meters away, trying to hide my nervousness. I looked at his arm again. The symbol was more visible now. His coat had fallen to his elbow. The wrinkled skin distorted the design, but you could still clearly see the rose surrounded by a serpent. It mesmerized me. I discreetly picked up my phone. I took a picture. Not out of curiosity, but instinct. Something inside me told me I would need that image later. Little did I know that that simple gesture would change everything. At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked around. No one had seen me. The hospital seemed suspended in time, as if everyone had stopped for a second. It was there that I felt the weight of what I had done. My heart was racing. I put my phone in my pocket and took a deep breath. I thought, "Maria, what are you doing?" But it was too late. The photo was there, recorded, and I couldn't erase it. I looked at his face again. He seemed to be sleeping, but a slight tremor in his lips made me think he might be conscious. I was silent for a moment and asked, "Sir, this symbol, what does it mean?" He slowly opened his eyes, and a deep look pierced me. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said, his voice hoarse. Those words chilled me to the bone. Before I could answer, he closed his eyes again. And then, something unexpected happened. The cell phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a message. I looked at the number. It was unknown. The message simply said, "Delete the photo." For a second, I thought it was a coincidence. But my heart started beating faster. How would anyone know I had taken that picture? I looked around nervously. The hallway was empty. The reception area was silent. It was impossible. And yet, there it was, the message. Real, direct, threatening. I pressed the lock button and put the phone away. I decided I wouldn't show it to anyone. But fear had already taken hold of me. I went back to work, trying to act normally. But every time I passed him, I felt that same shiver. The tattoo now seemed alive, as if it were watching me. During my shift, I met the hospital security guard, a kind man named Frank. He was an Army veteran and liked to chat with me during breaks. I showed him the photo, whispering, "Frank, have you ever seen anything like this?" Frank looked at the image and paled. He remained silent for a few seconds, then said in a low voice, "Maria, delete that." "No." "Why?" I asked, confused. He looked around, making sure no one was listening, and replied, "That symbol, it's ancient. Very ancient. And dangerous. If it's what I think it is, you're dealing with unforgiving people." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "But he's just an old man, Frank. A forgotten, sick man." Frank shook his head. "Nobody with that tattoo is only something, Maria." I put my phone away with trembling hands. The air felt heavier. I could barely breathe. That hospital, once so ordinary, now seemed like the center of a mystery I didn't understand. Frank stepped away, promising to check a few things. I was left alone, facing him again. The silence weighed like lead. I approached him and whispered, "Mr. John, who are you?" He opened his eyes, looked at me intently, and simply said, "Someone who tried to do the right thing in the wrong place." Those words kept echoing in my mind. The right thing in the wrong place. What did he mean by that? I left the room for a few minutes, trying to organize my thoughts. The hospital radio was playing an old song, the kind that seems to come from another era. Everything seemed out of place. When I returned, he was awake. He was staring intently out the window. I approached him, and he spoke without looking at me. "You've seen too much, girl. But perhaps God has chosen you." I swallowed hard. Before I could ask what he meant, Frank's phone rang across the hall. He answered, and I could hear his tense voice. "Yes, he's still here." "Yes, I understand." Frank looked at me and, with a serious expression, gestured for me to leave the room. "Maria, go to the cafeteria." "No." But before I could obey, something caught my attention. Outside, on the street, a black car was parking slowly. Tinted windows, engine off. 3 men emerged from it. All in suits. All with the same cold, determined expression. My body froze. I watched from the window as they entered through the front door. The sound of their shoes echoed like a warning. My heart raced. I ran to Frank, but he was already heading to the reception desk. His expression said it all. Something very serious was about to happen. I turned my gaze to the old man. He looked at me calmly, as if he already knew. "They've arrived, haven't they?" I asked. He just smiled sadly and replied, "The past is never forgotten." My legs felt weak. The entire hospital seemed to have stopped. Nurses whispered. Doctors observed discreetly. The tension was almost palpable. The 3 men in suits began walking down the hallways. One of them was holding an envelope. Another had a cell phone to his ear. The third, the tallest, seemed to be in charge of the others. As they approached the waiting room, my heart was already pounding. Frank tried to stop them, but they showed me something, maybe a name tag, maybe an order, and went ahead. Then the leader looked at the old man and said just one sentence, "Mr. Romano, it took us a while to find you." The entire room froze. Romano. It wasn't John. It was another name. A name that, at that moment, changed everything. I, Maria Lopez, a simple hospital cleaner, was standing before a man who was not just a forgotten patient. He was someone the whole world seemed to have been searching for, or fearing, for decades. And what would come next would be impossible to forget. The sound of those words, "Mr. Romano, it took us a while to find you." It echoed inside me like thunder. For a moment, the entire hospital seemed to fall silent. No sound, no voice. Just that silence heavy with mystery and fear. The old man, whom I knew only as John, slowly raised his gaze. He didn't seem frightened. On the contrary, there was something in his expression that mixed weariness and acceptance. As if he had waited for that moment for a very long time. The men in suits approached respectfully. One of them, the youngest, bowed slightly and said, "Sir, we've come to take you back." I watched everything with my heart racing, not understanding anything. "Take it back? Where to?" Frank, the security guard, tried to intervene. "You can't come in here without authorization." The taller man showed a document. "Court authorization. He's a federal ward." Frank went pale. I was breathless. A federal ward? What was happening? Before anyone could react, the old man raised one hand, a small gesture, but full of authority. "Not now," he said firmly. "The time has not yet come." The taller man nodded respectfully, as if obeying a commander. I looked at the old man's face. He was the same man as before, but something about him had changed. The serenity had given way to an imposing, almost unbelievable presence. He was no longer the forgotten old man. He was someone who had once commanded men and made history. My instincts told me to get out of there. But something held me back. I couldn't leave him. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt. The men stood near the door, watching. The old man looked at me and gestured for me to come closer. I hesitated, but he insisted. I knelt beside the chair and asked softly, "Who are you, really?" He took a deep breath and said, "Someone who made a mistake trying to save innocent people." The words came out slowly, heavy with pain. And for that, I paid the price of a lifetime in hiding. Before I could answer, one of the men's cell phones rang. He answered immediately, turned his back, and spoke in a low voice. I only heard fragments. "Yes, we confirm. He's here, and yes, the symbol is the same." Those words sent chills down my spine. The symbol is the same. They were talking about the tattoo. The emblem I had photographed. And then I realized, that tattoo wasn't just a mark. It was a sign of belonging. Suddenly, the man on the phone turned and looked directly at me. His gaze was cold and hard. For a second, I thought he knew about the photo. I clutched my phone tightly in my pocket, feeling my hands sweat. The old man noticed. "She doesn't know anything," he said calmly, as if defending me. The man stepped back respectfully. Silence returned. That's when the reception phone rang. Kelly answered, distracted as always, but her expression changed. "1 moment, sure, 1 second. She looked at the group and said hesitantly, "There's a call for Mr. Romano." I froze. Kelly had no way of knowing his real name. Someone had called specifically asking for that name. The taller man took the phone from her hands. "Who's speaking?" he asked. There was a pause. And then he paled. "Yes, sir. Understood." He turned to the old man and said, "Mr. Romano, it's him." The old man closed his eyes and nodded. "Put it on speakerphone." The sound of the voice that came from the phone sent shivers down my spine. Deep, measured, laden with a cold authority. "Giovanni Romano. It's been a long time since I've heard that name." Frank looked at me, confused. "Giovanni." The old man took a deep breath and replied, "That's me." The voice on the phone continued, "You disappeared, Giovanni. 30 years. Nobody believed you were still alive." The entire room fell silent. I felt a lump in my throat. 30 years missing. Who was that man? The voice on the other end sounded like someone powerful. "Do you know what they told me? That you betrayed the family. That you took our secrets and ran away. But I always knew. You had a reason." The old man, Giovanni, closed his eyes. "I didn't betray anyone. I saved what was left of us." "And now," the cold voice asked, "now that I've found you, what should I do with you?" Giovanni smiled slightly. "It depends on what's left of your humanity, Michael." The mention of the name caused the men in suits to exchange glances. One of them murmured, "Sir, he called you Michael?" The taller one nodded. "Yes. Michael Rinaldi." I recognized the name. I'd heard that last name before, in old news reports, documentaries about organized crime in New York. Rinaldi, name shrouded in power, violence, and mystery. The man on the phone side. "Old friend, you should have stayed dead." Giovanni replied, "I have been inside for years." The line was silent for a moment. Then, the voice said something unexpected. "She's with you, isn't she? The woman who found you." My heart froze. I didn't know how he knew, but I felt everyone's gaze on me. Giovanni looked at me and replied, "Yes. She's the only one who can still see people." On the other end of the line, the voice replied, more softly, "Then take care of her, Giovanni. Because after today, nothing will be the same." The phone went silent. The man hung up, confused, trying to understand. Giovanni took a deep breath, resting his head back in the chair. I didn't know what to think. It all seemed like a movie. And suddenly, I, a simple hospital cleaner, was in the middle of something involving the MAFIA, federal secrets, and a buried past. One of the men in the suit received a new message on his cell phone. He read it and muttered something that chilled me to the bone. "They're already on their way." Giovanni opened his eyes and said calmly, "The time has come." I didn't know what time it was. But deep down, I felt something very big was about to happen. Because when the past decides to return, it never comes alone. And what was about to enter through those doors would change the destiny of us all. The next few minutes were filled with pure silence and tension. The connection had ended, but the echo of that voice still hung in the air, heavy as lead. Frank paced restlessly down the hallway, while the three men in suits exchanged dark glances. Giovanni, the old man the world had forgotten, now seemed like a different man. His weary gaze had given way to an almost dangerous serenity, the kind of calmness that comes from seeing hell up close and learning to smile at it. The distant sound of approaching engines broke the silence. Outside, through the window, I saw another black car parking in front of the hospital. Then another. And another. At least 4, all identical, with tinted windows. My heart raced. I knew this wasn't good. Frank went to the reception desk, shouting, "No one gets in without ID." But before he could finish the sentence, the revolving door opened. Men in black suits began to enter. All with the same cold look, all with the same purpose. The hospital suddenly seemed too small for so much secrecy. The nurses recoiled, the patients looked on in fear. It was as if a shadow had taken over the place. And in the midst of it all, Giovanni remained motionless, staring at the floor, as if he had been expecting them. One of the new men approached, and the tallest of the first group went to meet him. The two exchanged a few quiet words. I tried to listen, but only caught fragments. "He's here. We need to act before." The rest was muffled. Frank reached for his holster. He always carried a discreet weapon, more as a precaution than for actual use. But at that moment, the gesture seemed pointless. There were too many. The leader of the new group looked directly at Giovanni and said, "Mr. Romano, you have something that belongs to us." The phrase sounded like a sentence. Giovanni looked up and replied, in a firm voice, "What belongs to you is the guilt. What I have is forgiveness." His words cut through the air. For a moment, no one moved. I felt my heart pounding, as if I were inside a movie that only got worse with each scene. One of the men stepped forward. "You know we can't let you leave here." Giovanni took a deep breath. "I never wanted to leave. I just wanted to be forgotten." The silence was broken by a dry sound. The reception phone rang again. Kelly looked, hesitated, but didn't answer. Everyone stared at the group. The new men began to spread out down the hallway. Frank tried to block them. "This is a hospital. You can't do this." The leader replied, "This isn't about medicine anymore, sir. This is about justice." I partially hid behind the counter, observing everything. Giovanni looked at me for a brief moment, and that look seemed to say, "Trust in me." One of the men in suits approached him and tried to force him to stand up. Giovanni calmly refused. "Not yet." His tone was firm, authoritative. Even the security guards hesitated. That's when the impossible happened. Giovanni took something from the inside pocket of his coat, a small silver crucifix, the same one I had seen before, attached to the rosary. He held it aloft and whispered, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." The leader, impatient, replied, "God isn't here, Romano." Giovanni smiled slightly. "He is. He always has been. It's just that you stopped looking at him." Tension rose. Frank stepped forward, trying to intervene, but one of the men shoved him forcefully. He fell, the radio slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, emitting a loud hiss that echoed down the hallway. The patients began to stir, the nurses whispering amongst themselves. The scene resembled contained chaos, poised to explode. That's when a new sound echoed from the back of the hospital, hurried, determined footsteps. Someone was approaching. Everyone stopped. And then, through the side door, another man in a suit appeared. Different from the others, older, imposing, with a presence that changed the atmosphere. He walked calmly, but each step seemed to weigh decades. The others moved away, automatically making way. The leader of the first group lowered his head in respect. I felt a shiver run through my body. Who was that man? He approached slowly, looked at Giovanni, and said in a deep, tired voice, "I should have known I'd find you like this, Giovanni. Between life and regret." Giovanni looked up and smiled. "Michael." The air grew thicker. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. It was him, The same voice from the phone call. The man behind the power. The CEO of the MAFIA. Michael Rinaldi. The name that for decades had been synonymous with fear. The same man who, according to rumors, had disappeared from public life years ago to run his empire from the shadows. He stopped in front of Giovanni, observing him in silence. 30 years, and you still owe me answers. Giovanni calmly replied, No, Michael. I gave you life. What I owed, I paid a long time ago. His words seemed to carry an invisible weight. Michael clenched his fists, but didn't react. The tension between them was almost palpable. I could barely breathe. I was witnessing something that seemed biblical, as if forgiveness and guilt were face to face, measuring their strength one last time. Michael turned, looked at me, and asked, Are you the woman who found him? I nodded, startled. Then know this, girl. If he's alive, it's because of you. I didn't understand what he meant, but his tone was respectful, not threatening. Giovanni lowered his head, moved. She has eyes that see what others ignore. The same kind of eyes I once saw in someone. Michael looked away, took a deep breath, and said, I never thought I'd see him again. Much less like this. And then, a single tear fell down the face of the man everyone called a monster. That scene, the tired old man, the powerful man, the silence of the hospital, was almost unreal. I understood then that their past wasn't just made of violence. There was something more. Something that bound them together through ties deeper than any blood. But what nobody knew was that the truth behind this connection was yet to be revealed. And when it came to light, nothing, not the hospital, not Michael, not me, would ever be the same again. The air felt heavier. Michael's presence had transformed the hospital into a sacred stage, where past and present faced each other like two ghosts finally recognizing one another. The silence was so dense you could hear the clock ticking away each second. Giovanni maintained a steady gaze, even before the man feared by so many. Michael breathed slowly, as if fighting something inside, anger, perhaps, or regret. 30 years, Giovanni. 30 years of letting me believe you betrayed me, Michael said, his voice breaking. Giovanni simply closed his eyes. I didn't betray you, boy. I saved you. Those words made time stand still. Boy. Those two syllables echoed like thunder inside the hospital. Everyone looked at each other, confused. Frank, in the back, looked at me and stammered, Boy. Michael frowned. Saved. You destroyed everything. You disappeared and took our records, the money, the names. Because of you, our family became a target of the government. Giovanni shook his head, tired. You don't understand, Michael. I did this for you. Michael's gaze hardened. For me. Don't play with my intelligence. Giovanni raised the crucifix between trembling fingers. You don't remember, but when I found you, you had nothing. No name, no home, no hope. Michael hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. What are you saying? Giovanni took a deep breath. I took you off the streets of New York when you were 8 years old. Your mother had died. I gave you food. I gave you shelter. I gave you a new name. The room fell silent. Everyone's heart seemed to stop for a moment. Michael paled. Lies. That's a lie. Giovanni remained calm. Look at me, Michael. I raised you. I was the father you never had. Michael's face began to change. The powerful, cold, calculating man now looked like a lost child, trying to understand a world that was crumbling. You were the priest at the shelter? Giovanni nodded slowly. I was. And when the shelter burned down, I was the one who got you out of there. Tears began to stream down Michael's face, silently. But they told me you died in the fire. Giovanni smiled sadly. That's what I wanted them to believe. I needed to disappear to protect you. I could barely breathe. This revelation hit me like a punch. Giovanni wasn't just the Mafia's former accountant. He was the man who had created the very boss who was now confronting him. Frank whispered, My God. And for the first time, that phrase didn't sound like a habit, but like a prayer. Giovanni continued, When the police started hunting us all down, I took the blame. I embezzled the money. I created fake documents. All to get you out of that world. I promised your mother, before she died, that I would save what little humanity remained in your heart. Michael seemed paralyzed. You knew what that would mean. You've turned me into an orphan again. Giovanni replied, I prefer a living orphan to a dead son. The words cut deep. The silence was almost unbearable. None of the men dared to move. Even the ticking of the clock seemed slower. Michael took a step back, trying to regain his composure. So, all of this was to protect me? Giovanni nodded. Yes. And to atone for our sins. He pulled a small, rusty key from his pocket and placed it on the table beside him. This is what's left. The account where I kept the money. All donated, Michael. Every penny. Hospitals, orphanages, shelters. That was the price of peace. Michael stared at the key as if it were burning. You donated the family fortune. Giovanni simply replied, It was money stained with blood. Only love could cleanse it. The men behind him began to shift restlessly. Some seemed confused, others outraged. One of them whispered, He gave it all, to charity? Michael lowered his head. The man who controlled criminal empires stood there, facing his own past, disarmed. You believed you could buy God's forgiveness with charity? Giovanni smiled tenderly. You can't buy forgiveness. But you plant love to see if he still remembers us. That response made Michael cry openly. None of us dared to move. It was as if we were witnessing a scene from another dimension, the reunion of a father and son separated by sin. Giovanni extended his trembling hand, and Michael, hesitantly, took it. It was as if time stood still. That touch spoke louder than 1,000 words. I don't hate you, Dad, Michael murmured, through tears. I just don't understand why you abandoned me. Giovanni replied, Because love sometimes needs silence to protect. I cried too. It was impossible not to feel. That man whom everyone considered a criminal was now revealing himself as someone who had loved more than life itself. The sun began to stream through the window, illuminating Giovanni's face. He seemed at peace. You need to get off this path, Michael. There's still time to start over. Michael shook his head. It's too late. Giovanni smiled. For God, it's never too late. Frank, overcome with emotion, made the sign of the cross. Kelly wept quietly behind the counter. That hospital, so accustomed to pain and despair, was now a stage for redemption. But fate had not yet finished its work. Because at that very moment, one of the men in suits received a message. He read it, turned pale, and said, Sir, we have a problem. Someone leaked the hospital images. The media is coming here. Chaos had returned. Michael looked at Giovanni and said firmly, We need to get him out of here. Now. But Giovanni simply smiled, slowly closing his eyes. No, son. I'm already where I'm supposed to be. The monitor next to the chair started beeping. Kelly ran. Frank called for help. Doctors appeared out of nowhere. I knelt beside him, holding his hand. He opened his eyes one last time and whispered, Maria, take care of him, and never let anyone feel invisible like I felt. And then his body relaxed. That sacred silence returned. Michael was crying, kneeling beside him, murmuring, Father, forgive me. But the story wasn't over yet. Because, in the next few hours, the whole world would discover who Giovanni Romano was. And what he had left behind would change lives. Giovanni's body was motionless, but the entire room seemed to pulse with something invisible. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if his soul still filled the hospital, like a soft fragrance of peace and farewell. Michael remained kneeling, holding the cold hand of the man he had believed for decades to be his enemy. Tears fell shamelessly, dissolving years of hatred and guilt. Frank placed a hand on his shoulder in a silent gesture of compassion. I was there, beside him, feeling something I had never felt before, a mixture of pain and relief, sadness and light. It was as if God were whispering to us all, Now do you understand what love is? Kelly wept softly behind the counter. Even the monitors seemed to slow down, as if respecting that moment. A man who had lived in the shadows was dying in the light of forgiveness. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the air. A doctor rushed over, trying to revive him, but Michael raised his hand and said, "No. Let him rest." His voice was serene, broken, but full of respect. And so, Giovanni Romano, the man the world thought lost, departed in silence. No gunshots, no sirens. Only the soft sound of air passing through the windows and faith lingering in the air. While his body was being covered, Michael remained kneeling. I could see the boy hidden inside that man. That same street kid, saved 30 years ago, was now saying goodbye to the only father he ever had. No one dared break the silence. Even the men in suits kept their heads bowed, as if they were before something sacred. It was as if heaven itself had descended for a moment upon that forgotten Dallas hospital. I felt the tears fall. Not just for Giovanni, but for all those who live and die unnoticed. For all the invisible ones who cross our paths, asking only for a glance, a gesture, a memory. Frank took off his hat. Kelly made the sign of the cross. And Michael, with a trembling voice, murmured a prayer in Italian. None of us understood the words, but we all felt the meaning. It was farewell. It was gratitude. It was love. When the paramedics arrived to remove the body, Michael slowly stood up. His red eyes contrasted sharply with his dark suit. He looked like a different man, empty, hunched over, but purified. He looked at me and said, "You did what no one else did for him, Maria." "Thank you." I could barely answer. I only saw a man in need of care. He smiled. And that's what the world needs most. As Giovanni's body was being carried away, a sheet of paper fell from his coat pocket. I picked it up, carefully folded. It was a diary page, handwritten in shaky letters. I read in silence. "If they ever find me, tell them I left nothing but love. That what I stole was only time to repair what evil had destroyed." The tears returned. I folded the paper and handed it to Michael. He held it against his chest, without saying a word. At that moment, the entire hospital seemed different. The lights were softer, the air lighter. It was as if Giovanni's soul had left something there, a silent blessing. Hours later, the news began to spread. First among the employees, then throughout the city. Mysterious man dies in hospital after visit from figures linked to the MAFIA. But nobody knew his real name. The press tried to find out who he was, but Michael made sure the truth was preserved. He wasn't a criminal, he told the medical team. He was a father trying to save his son. The next day, the hospital received an anonymous donation. $10 million. The message read, "To care for the invisible." Frank showed me the letter. I knew who it was from. Michael. It was his way of fulfilling the last promise he made to his father. With the money, the hospital opened a new wing, Giovanni Romano Wing A, space designed for patients without family, forgotten elderly people, and the homeless. A place where no one would be ignored. I was invited to work there. I accepted without thinking. Every time I cleaned a room or served a meal, I felt that Giovanni was still nearby, smiling. And every morning, before starting my shift, I would say a short prayer. The same one he used to say, "Lord, let me see those whom the world does not see." Sometimes, when the sun shone through the window pane, a soft light would illuminate the hallway. I liked to believe it was him, coming back for a visit. But the story didn't end there. Because, days later, Michael reappeared. In a suit, but with a transformed expression. He was no longer the cold man I knew. He was someone trying to start over. He called me outside, near the hospital garden. The wind was blowing lightly, and the sun was touching the leaves. "Maria," he said, "you need to see something." He opened a folder and showed me an old envelope. Inside, a will. Signed by Giovanni. "He left this for you." I trembled. "For me." "But I—" "Read it," he interrupted, with a sad smile. I opened the paper. The shaky letters read, "To the woman who saw me when no one else did. May God bless your days and use you as a mirror of the love that transforms." My heart sank. Michael continued, "He left something more. A complete diary, and a story the world needs to know." That's when I understood. Giovanni didn't just want to be remembered. He wanted the truth to be told. And the truth had not yet been fully revealed. Because at the bottom of that diary, there was something no one expected to find. Something that would change everything we knew about him, and about Michael. That afternoon, the sun seemed different. Warm, but gentle. Those hours between day and night, when the sky blends between gold and orange, always made me feel that heaven and earth touch. And it was precisely at that moment that Michael returned with the diary in his hands. He called me over to the small hospital chapel, recently renovated with part of the donation. Light streamed through the stained glass, reflecting colors on the white walls. Everything seemed to have an invisible purpose. "Maria," he said, handing me the diary, "you deserve to know what he never told anyone." I hesitated. "Are you sure? Maybe it should stay with you." He shook his head. "No." He wanted it to be read by someone pure of heart. And that someone is you. I opened the diary with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed, smelling of time. The first page bore a sentence written in firm handwriting: "The truth hurts, but it sets you free." The following pages were memoirs. Giovanni spoke of his youth, his days in New York, his rise in the underworld. He spoke of fear, loneliness, and a guilt that had haunted him for decades. But then, in the middle of the text, a name appeared. Elena Romano. "Who is Elena?" I asked. Michael was silent. His expression changed. "Keep reading." His heart began to beat faster. The following lines were a confession. Giovanni revealed that, before disappearing, he had secretly married, and had a daughter. My blood ran cold. "A daughter?" I whispered. Michael nodded slowly. "Yes. She was born before me. Giovanni always believed she died in the fire." I continued reading, tears blurring my vision. Giovanni described the despair of the night of the fire, the chaos, the screams. He said he had managed to save a boy, Michael, but never found the girl. "He searched for her for years," Michael said, his voice breaking. "But he never knew that she survived too." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Michael took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, before coming to Dallas, I received an anonymous letter. Inside was an old birth certificate. The child's name was Elena Maria Romano. My heart seemed to stop for a moment. Elena Maria. My name is Maria Elena Lopez. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "No, that's a coincidence," I murmured, trying to laugh nervously. But Michael looked at me with an expression that sent shivers down my spine. Coincidences don't leave inheritances in wills. I opened the diary again, trembling. On the last pages, there was a folded letter, tucked between the sheets. The handwriting was familiar. It was his. I read it aloud. "If this letter ever reaches her, I want her to know I never stopped searching. Maria, my daughter, forgive me for not having found you." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. I felt my legs give way. Frank, who had been watching from afar, rushed to hold me. I couldn't breathe. The world was spinning. The voices were distorted. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat. Michael knelt beside me, his eyes brimming with tears. "He searched for you until his last day. You were Giovanni's lost daughter." My hands were trembling. Tears came in waves. Everything made sense now. The inexplicable connection, his gaze, the way he called me the chosen girl. I remembered every moment, the touch on my hand, the words before he died, "Take care of him." It wasn't just a request. It was a father's last wish for his daughter. I cried like never before. Not from sadness, but from a mixture of love, forgiveness, and amazement. God had written a story so impossible that only he could have imagined it. Michael placed his hand on my shoulder. "Now I understand why he said destiny had a purpose for you." It still hadn't sunk in. I, the cleaning lady no one noticed, was the daughter of a man the whole world had feared, and secretly loved. "He left you a gift," said Michael, opening a small box he had brought with him. Inside, an antique medallion with the symbol of the rose and the serpent, the same as the tattoo. But in the center, there was something new, a small golden heart. I took the medallion in my hands. On the back, an inscription, Love transforms even what is born from darkness. Tears welled up again. He believed in redemption, Michael said. And he left you the symbol of that. Good triumphing over evil. For a moment, no one spoke. The chapel was enveloped in soft light, and the distant sound of the wind sounded like music. That's when Michael held my hand and said something that marked me forever. He gave me a life. Now it's your turn to give meaning to his. I understood what he meant. Giovanni had left a legacy, not of power, but of mercy. And it was up to me to continue that mission. I closed the diary, my heart still trembling. I looked at the stained glass window, where the light was projected upon us. For the first time in my life, I felt that my past and my future were meeting. Michael smiled. Now we're family. Brothers. And we won't live in the shadows anymore. We embraced right there, amidst tears and silent promises. But as we stood up, something caught my eye, a letter still sealed inside the safe. Unlike the others, it was sealed with red wax. On the envelope, there was only one handwritten sentence, to be opened at the right time. I looked at Michael. He frowned. What could this be? I held the envelope to my chest and replied, perhaps, the ultimate truth. And that's how I realized that, even after death, Giovanni was still guiding our steps, and still had something to reveal to us. I stared at the sealed envelope for a long time. That red wax, the aged paper, the faint scent of incense. Everything told me that Giovanni had prepared it as his final farewell. Michael and I exchanged silent glances, as if we were afraid to open it. The chapel was empty, except for the wooden cross before the altar. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light on the marble floor. It seemed as if heaven itself awaited what was to come. With trembling hands, I broke the seal. The sound of the paper tearing echoed in the room like an ancient sigh. Inside, there was a letter and a small, yellowed photograph. The letter began simply, "If you are reading this, it's because love has finally conquered fear." Tears came even before I finished the first line. I continued reading, my voice choked with emotion. "Maria, my daughter, the blood that runs through you doesn't come from war, but from forgiveness. I've struggled my whole life to understand that true power isn't about controlling others, but about surrendering to God's love." The photo showed a younger Giovanni, holding two children, a boy and a girl. I recognized the smile, even small, even from a distance. It was Michael. And me. You were born in different worlds, but you share the same destiny, to show that good still exists, even when the world gives up. I looked at Michael, and he was crying silently. He planned everything, right down to the end, he whispered. I just nodded. On paper, he continued. "Maria, if one day the weight of life makes you doubt your purpose, go back to the hospital. Go to the ward for the forgotten. There, you will find God in the eyes of those whom the world ignores. And there, you will understand that love never dies, it only changes location." I felt a warmth in my chest, as if Giovanni were speaking to me at that very moment. Michael picked up the letter and kissed the paper. "He's here," he said, looking around. "I can feel it." We knelt right there, in silence. The wind blew through the window and made the chapel candles tremble. For a moment, it felt as if a gentle presence touched our shoulders. And then, a memory came to mind, Giovanni's gaze in the waiting room, that first night I saw him, alone. I thought I was saving a stranger, but, in truth, God was giving me back a father. At that moment, I understood that life is full of these divine mirrors. We think we are helping, when it is love that helps us to see. Michael stayed in Dallas for a few days. He visited the hospital every morning, sometimes bringing flowers to Giovanni's ward. He said that, for the first time, he could sleep without fear. Gradually, he began to talk about shutting down the family's shady businesses, dissolving the illegal companies, and transforming the Roman Empire into a social welfare foundation. He wanted to honor his father through good deeds. That's what he would do, he said one day. And this time, without hiding it from God. I began to write the story. Every detail, every memory. Not as a scandal, but as a testimony. Because Giovanni deserved to be remembered not for what he did, but for what he became. The diary, the letter, the medallion, everything became a symbol of something greater. A reminder that, even in the darkest depths, there is still a path back to the light. Months later, the Giovanni Romano wing was officially inaugurated. Doctors, patients, and volunteers crowded the corridor. High on the wall, a phrase in bronze shone, "Never ignore those whom the world has forgotten." That day, I held the medallion and looked at the sky. The sun streamed through the windows and fell upon me like a blessing. I felt a profound peace. Giovanni's voice seemed to whisper in the wind, "I'm proud of you, my daughter." Michael was beside me, more serene, with a small smile. "Now I understand what he meant by redemption," he murmured. "It's not the end of guilt. It's the beginning of love." We closed our eyes, and for the first time, I felt that Giovanni was truly at rest. His story was no longer about the Mafia, guilt, or mystery. It was a story of transformation. And somehow, that transformation had reached me too. Today, every time I see an elderly person sitting alone in the waiting room, I remember him. And I approach him. Because I know what it means to be seen after so long in the darkness. I learned that God doesn't choose the perfect. He chooses the willing. And sometimes, he uses a simple cleaning lady to fix what power has destroyed. Every night, before I leave, I pass by the chapel. I light a candle, look at the crucifix, and whisper, "Thank you, Father, for teaching me that true love is given in silence." And when the wind blows through the sails, I know he hears. Because love, when it's true, never dies, it just changes form. And that's how the man the world forgot became a symbol of compassion for an entire city. A legacy born of pain, transformed by faith, and sustained by a miracle. The reunion of a father and daughter whom time could not separate. You know, sometimes life puts us in places that don't make sense. We think it's coincidence, chance, blind fate. But then we realize it was purpose. That there was a plan, even amidst the pain, even when everything seemed empty. Giovanni Romano entered that hospital as a forgotten man, and left it as a miracle. What seemed like the end was the beginning of a new story, a story written by God with lines of redemption and love. And it's impossible not to wonder, how many times have we also ignored someone who just needed a glance? How many Giovannis pass by us every day, silently begging not to die invisible? What would have happened if Mary hadn't stopped, if she had followed the rules and turned her face away like the others? Perhaps that man would have left alone. Perhaps the world would never have known the power of compassion. But she saw. And the simple act of seeing changed destinies, healed wounds, and rekindled faith even in the hardest hearts. How many times in your life have you felt like nobody saw you? That the world had forgotten you? And now I ask you, if someone had reached out to you at that moment, what would have changed in you? This story isn't about the Mafia, nor about secrets. It's about mercy. About love that transforms the impossible. About faith that rewrites even the ending that seemed sealed. Giovanni proved that it's never too late to start over. Michael discovered that forgiveness is worth more than any power. And Maria? Well, she learned that being seen is a miracle, and seeing others is a gift. And you? Who in your life needs to be seen, heard, and remembered today? Perhaps God is calling you to be someone's compassionate gaze. To reach out, forgive, or simply listen. Because when you do that, you not only transform the other person, you transform yourself as well. And remember, love never dies. It changes form, time, location, but it continues. Always. Before I finish, I want to thank you for staying with me until now. I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you health, peace, joy, and hope. May He remind you every day that you is seen, is loved, and it is important. If this story touched your heart, like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot so that more people can learn about stories that rekindle faith and love. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment when God showed you that love still exists? Or has she already been Maria in the life of someone the world had forgotten? Think about it carefully, because sometimes the greatest miracle in life happens when we decide to see.